For the second part of the lecture for this week, we are going to discuss two fundamentals of film forms, realism and anti-realism. So as you're going to see in these two images, like in paintings, we already had a long tradition of realistic paintings and anti-realistic paintings, and actually something that was popular in some prehistoric movements and also in the medieval Europe. And for Andre Bazin, the theorist of cinematic realism, that's the way painting should go. And thanks for the medium photography, there is no need anymore for realistic depiction of images in or nature in painting anymore, because we can easily, with photography, reproduce. For Andre Bazin, thanks to the birth of photographic medium, this is the direction that paintings should go. No perspective, absence of realism, because by photography we can easily reproduce reality. Photography and cinema for Bazin have freed visual artists from the desire to simply duplicate reality. For him, realist representations in cinema is a superior form. So for Bazin, who was actually a very influential film theorist and was writing in the journal, in the French journal Cahiers du Cinéma, he believed that the elements of film should match the way we perceive reality and should respect viewers' experience of reality. So for that reason, he was interested in two cinematic techniques, deep focus and long takes. Although with the digital cinematography, long takes do not necessarily appeal to realism, but for the time being, when long takes and deep focus photography evolved in cinema, there were less distortion of reality in long takes. That's why he was not interested in rapid editings of Soviet montage, and he believed that long takes were superior to fast-paced editing. And he was interested in long takes because there was a high level of uncertainty, ambiguity in long takes. There's because the viewers have that sort of freedom to maneuver within the frame that or in the take that is more similar to the way we perceive reality in day-to-day basis. And for that reason, long takes and deep focus photography would create more audience participation, and for that reason corresponds more with reality. So the first schools famous for realism is a school of filmmaking that shaped in post-war Italy and is known as Italian Neo-realism, with very influential films. Notable figures are Roberto Rossellini, Vittorio De Sica, Federico Fellini's early films. These filmmakers were using non-professional actors, no studio settings, natural lightings, all to explore and depict the conditions of poor and the working class in post-war Italy. So all of them usually with some sort of a background in Marxist ideology. They were against dramatizations of this story. So they often feature children in major roles. Maybe because these characters are frequently observational, they are wanderer and then participatory. Kids are not ideologically grounded. They can see, they just observe and they see the sort of certain contradictions in our society. And they come into some sort of understanding of the situation. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips from films made by these directors, Italian directors of the School of Italian Neo-realism. So in this first clip that I want to show from Rome Open City, I want you to look at it and see how it's different. The scene is different than a Hollywood movie. If such a scene, such an action, was going to be depicted by a Hollywood filmmaker or more mainstream filmmaker, how would it be different? That's
Francesco! 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 Pina! 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 Francesco! Francesco Carogna! Francesco! 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 Lasciatemi, Francesco! Lasciatemi! Lasciatemi! Francesco! 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 No!
so. As you just watched this dramatic scene, uh, one thing that makes it very realistic is the way that death is happening. You don't see that theatrical performances that a person put a hand lying on her chest and is slowly falling, and you see the expressions, and it just takes some seconds for them to fall down. Actually, with the war documentaries, people realize that actually the real action of death is very different than theater. In a more mainstream or typical depiction of such an action in cinema, you usually see rapid editing. You see the facial expressions of an evil soldier, then a close image of a gun, then the facial expression of the victim, and then the shot itself. In this point, we never see actually the bullets. We never see the gun, and that actually more shocking and more realistic. Let's watch this scene again. I say there's more audience participation. You see, there are two layers. Usually in Hollywood movies, the action only is taking place at the center, and they want us to pay attention to where the action is taking place. Here, you see two layers. Look at the scene, how in the background, the little boy is kicking the soldiers, and in the foreground, you see the mother is screaming and crying, and you see the priest. So there are multiple actions, and it's that for that reason it's more realistic. It's not like the whole entire universe is paused to see the action and performances of one character. Um, so look at the boy. He's kicking in the background, and in the foreground you see the mother, and you hear her voice, and this is the very famous scene. Probably shocked the world when it was released. It was one of the most dramatic and famous scene of these injustices, thieves. The next clip that I want to show is from a movie called Umberto D by Vittorio De Sica. It's the story of this old man and his dog. He is not able to pay the rent, and I think he was diagnosed with some kind of cancer. So he decided to commit suicide, and he cannot find anyone to adopt his dog. So this is the moment that he has decided to get rid of the dog. Uh, so look at how the scene is actually constructed right here. So again, like Hollywood movies, that you have the character at the center. It's divided, and you're just getting small portion of the frame. And you see the trees. The trees are like darkly painted, like we talked about realism, but in a way they are a little inky, and they just the rows of trees go. You see that they go to the background, and that serves a purpose, but also it gives a more sort of a realistic depth. You want to sort of explore around rather than focusing on one part of the image. So it's crossing the barrier. Throughout the movie, we see always he walks against people. It seems that no matter what happens, he never fits into the society. And again, the tree is overshadowing, creating this really interesting composition. And kids are playing in the background. Extreme low angle, threatening figure. And look at the scene, how beautiful it is. The rows of trees, large portion of the frame, and it's just creating this sort of depth because this sort of the blackness of the trees are going into the end of the center. So we see the depth in that point of view shot, and the dog is just in a small figure. You see other kids, people who do not really care about what is happening, the sufferings of human characters. Train is going the opposite direction. Look at the trees. Just how it divided the frame. It seems that at this point the dog is coming into an understanding of what his action. That the old man was not a bad person. There is a good and bad in everyone. So we don't really have
Su,
protagonists and antagonists
su.
in the realist filmmaking,
Bravo, flight.
unlike the mainstream ones.
Bravo, flight.
Um,
Bravo.
but nothing really has
Bravo.
changed.
Corri, flight.
And as
Corri.
slowly, now you see the
Corri.
purpose for the trees that creating that depth. It,
Corri.
it allowing them
Corri,
to
flight.
fade in the background of the film. They're becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. Uh, Part of that source of endless trees. And then you see that the boys in the opposite direction, they're just playing. The camera doesn't follow the main characters. And you see new characters are coming into the foreground. So it shows that the universe, both the nature and the kids that are playing, is just experiencing another day. The universe doesn't care about um, good versus evil. The universe doesn't care about our daily sufferings. It's just one. For the universe, it's just one small thing that happened. And you another movement that was formed in the mid 90s, poetic realism in Iranian cinema, was directly inspired by Italian Neo-realism, usually featuring kids as the central character. Usually, actually, the main location is the car. Like there is one film called 10 when there's a kind of digital camera placed in a car, and so the director is shooting the scene in distance. So the presence of the director is not going to affect the realistic expectations we have from the. But even in Hollywood nowadays, we see a tendency towards realism growing. Look at the success of films like Moonlight and Boyhood, winning Academy Awards. Both films, again, are centering around children, no dramatic ending. Moonlight actually was inspired by another realist film by French director Francis Truffaut called 400 Blows. So again, you see some sort of ambiguity present in these films with less sort of dramatic climaxes. So the next idea that I want to discuss quickly is the anti-realism. So as like Bazin believed in realism, there were actually movements, for example, German Expressionism, that they believed in forms. They wanted to distort reality as much as possible. They were creating dreamy images, hyper-reality, avant-garde imagery. I'm going to show you an example, a movie by a German expressionist cinema, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So yeah, this is the scene from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in 1920, an example of German expressionism. Look at everything. The shadows, purely formalist. There's no realistic source of lighting. Certain parts of the image is dark, certain part is not. Or exaggerated use of shadow. Architecture is distorted image is nothing realistic. So look at these scenes. Um, just even the intertitles are very much distorted. They try to rather than reality, they try to represent the subconscious, the mental impulses of the psychic characters. It's just the madness uh, in the way they perceive the world. I'm going to show you a little further image. You can look at how area, look at the buildings and the streets, and it's just also weird, um, unrealistic use of lighting. Um, so the last thing that I want to talk is a theory that, in a way, synthesizes these two movements. Rudolf Arnheim's theory of aesthetics. Rudolf Arnheim believed that actually these being expressionist or expressionist is not necessarily against realism. So he believed that actually an artistic work should, at the same time that it represents the reality, but that's just the beginning. Without distorting reality, it should be very expressive. So we wanted something in between. So for him, the artistic function of the medium should not be found in its just the way reproduce reality, but how that reality was reproduced. So in this scene, you see just a frame and just levels of depth is creating this sort of very strange look. You look at and it's not exactly the way we see the reality when something is captured by the camera. When these objects appear, these objects appear very large in front. Um, so I'm going to show you to give an example that actually Rudolf Arnheim discussed in his writing. Some examples of this scene by Chaplin. So in this scene from Gold Rush, Arnheim argues that hunger is shown in the most artistic way. So for a very realistic filmmaker, and sometimes he says like a lazy filmmaker, you just show a hungry man in front of uh, an expensive restaurant. But here, in this scene that you're watching, it's going to be more effective because of the expressiveness of the act, although it doesn't really destroy the realistic touch of the scene still remains highly expressive. So this is an example of art film for Arnheim.
Desperate with hunger, and here it was, Thanksgiving Day. Nevertheless, there was something to be. Not quite done yet, said the little fellow. Give it 2 more minutes. Come on, said Big Jim.
This week's film is Casablanca, a romantic film by Michael Curtiz, and This is a film that some people say that it was a justification of Americans' foreign policy to enter into the war. The reluctance of Bogart characters to do something or not, to take an action, it was some sort of a parallel with the United States reluctance to whether to enter into the war or not. Beside that, this film. Your assignment one is on this film, so you have to watch this movie carefully. But for this week's screening question, look at the certain bracketed scene that I talked in the first part of the lecture, and see if there's any part that you all of a sudden see the changes in the stylistic or formal elements. I can say that there's a flashback scene as an obvious one that you can discuss, but there are other parts that are very different from the rest of the movie and that you can talk about and explain what thematic or narrative meaning does this break in the pattern suggest. Thank you.